Just this morning, I received an email saying that my 2 reviewers have handed in their reports. So officially Dr. Mandy, but it isn't about that title. It also is about being heard. When you've got that little DR in the front of your name, people start to listen a bit more. And it isn't about becoming or assimilating into that colonial structure of institutions. It's about breaking those barriers and really taking down those colonial structures of invasion and making sure that the right information, the cultural information, is embedded right from the very beginning. And what I mean by that, like, I'm writing a course for third year architect students at Melbourne Uni at the moment, and it's all about getting them out of the classroom, taking them outside, teaching them about simple things like, well, it's not simple, it's really major, but it's something that's often overlooked. What's the difference between a welcome and an acknowledgement? What does it truly mean? How do you design on country? How do you look at country? How do you kind of, in an urban environment, how do you keep your culture alive and make sure that culture continues? And the way that I kind of say it, that everyone can do, is you zone out of all that mad noise that's happening around you, all the trams and the yelling and the horns, and you focus on the important sound. So the important sound could be a little dun-dun or a rainbow lorikeet flying across. And at the moment, they're going crazy in the city, finding partners and nests and things like that. So even at home, I'll be having 3 TVs on, and my niece will have music on, and I can still hear that black cocky or that currawong in the far distance, because you tune your listening into nature.
Really, what I'm most passionate about is teaching people about Indigenous cultures, and not specific kind of, dreaming stories, but, what is the nature of the dreaming? What is the nature of Indigenous cultures that make them so different from modern cultures? This oral tradition, this embedding of dance and art and weaving and carving in everyday life, the egalitarian nature of these societies where power is distributed, where leaders don't have the authority to compel others to do anything. These are really amazing cultures. People were very fit and healthy in these cultures. Lots of connection, lots of a sense of individual autonomy, or what we call relational autonomy. So very much about people being recognized as autonomous beings, but in relation to others, in deep relation to others, human and non-human creatures of the earth and the skies and the sea. So I really think that there's so much to learn, and it would be very useful for people to understand how specific their way of going through the world is, and how much more there is out there to draw from.
Light bulb moment for me in thinking about, actually, I have been in lots of ways indoctrinated into another system, but we call it culture, or we don't necessarily think about it. And I was very privileged, I think, to have that ability to have that, to grow up in that way, and to have a sense of a way of being and doing and knowing that is fundamentally Indigenous, that's tied to our sovereignty. And that was important to me. So I think that having that realization that is a perspective that I bring to how I do my research, but also when I'm reading books, when I'm writing my own text, that's a perspective that I bring, was really important. So my PhD research effectively proposes a paradigmatic approach to reading and engaging with our literature, with our text. So looking at kind of 5 books across Indigenous literary history in this context, in the Australian context. Looking at those books and reading them from that perspective, from our Indigenous ways of being, knowing and doing. And yeah, just thinking through that as a model for the way that we can read.
So I started to question, what does climate change mean to us as Aboriginal people? And I went back to William Barrick's thoughts and his legacy that still drives me today. Give us this land and we will show you that we can work it. And understanding that climate change is coming. How do I actually prepare this land for climate change? I can't change climate change collectively across Australia, but we are actually preparing for climate change right here on this 200 acres by taking cattle out of the water, by using bore water, by trying to increase the biodiversity of this small block of land so that other small landholders can actually come and learn from us. When the demand and supply, when Coles and Woolworths can't supply us with all of our daily needs that we're so used to and we overuse and throw away half of it, when people have to go back to learning to grow their own vegetables and fruit and things like that, that where can they learn how to do that? And I'm hoping that we are ready for when that challenge comes, that they can use this place as an example of best land management practice in trying times that humans will face in the near future.
One of my people is the Bundjalung people of northern New South Wales. We have a particular type of tea tree. So if you're familiar with tea tree oil, as many people are, that actually comes from a tree that only grows naturally in the Bundjalung region. And so we have particular knowledges, in particular women's knowledge, around the use of that tree, because it's antibacterial, and where its leaves fall into water, so it tends to grow around, water. Where the leaves fall into the water, it actually infuses that water with health. So when we say things like country makes us healthy, it's not a metaphor, it's an actual practice. And if I was to think about indigenisation of curriculum, I often see that if we look at the body of knowledge that is known as that water source, I think that, Indigenous peoples in our knowledge, we are those leaves that will fall into the water and will infuse it with health.
Yeah, look, history is critically important for us, and I'll re-emphasise that importance. That we were deprived history, we were cut off from history. As I said before, we were told we belonged to the Stone Age and we're a dying race. The reality is we needed to challenge that, and we need to put ourselves back in. It's not just about discoverers and explorers and settlers and Don Bradman and even Phar Lap. Aboriginal people have played a major part in the history of this country and needed to be brought into that space. So these are the stories that I like to see delivered to our communities, our families and our younger generations. But it's not just us. It's non-Indigenous people. They need to be told the truth of what happened in this country across the last 230 odd years, to know the truth about this country and how that history has impacted onto us. But even of greater importance is the fact that this is 65,000 years of history. That is the country's greatest treasure, greatest cultural treasure. That is there to be shared by everybody. And the reality is that's the thing that tourists from overseas want to come and hear about and see. That's what needs to be capitalised on, and that's what needs to be told. And as I said, non-Indigenous people that are largely ignorant of history, they need to be informed of what's happened. Not just the tragedy and horror of what's happened, but also the incredible triumphs, that Aboriginal people have been part of. So that's really important part of history.
I'm really happy that all of those archives have been protected for a long time. I think that's wonderful. But I'd also feel quite conflicted because they're sort of all locked up. They're kind of contained. So that's tricky to manage. So I often don't try to think about that. I feel that feeling, gloss over it, get back to the practicality of saying the words, which is really important. But by taking those archives out of their boxes, out of the concrete, out of those sort of very colonial institutions, back into the hearts and mouths of my people is probably one of my most proudest moments. If I hear my cousins speaking in language, if I hear perhaps a child that I've taught from school calling out to me in language in the supermarket, if I hear my grandchildren saying, "Love you, Nan," as they leave in language, that's the aim, right? To hear language and to be able to use it. Actually, even use it incorrectly is fine with me, as long as people are using it.
So the word migration for me, I looked at the migration and I couldn't find a way of explaining that from a cultural perspective in regards to the Torres Strait Islander movement, because it would, from a western side, it would mean that we left our home now, that we are no longer connected there, that we're going to build a new life in Australia. And I couldn't see that. If I was to fully go into the idea of the migration, it would mean this disconnection to and our identity as Torres Strait Islanders. So I explained it more from a cultural perspective now. This is why I used the Lubabat sap, the driftwood, as my metaphor.